Hello friends, I am Dr. Chatter, not a real person, but an actor playing the part of a mad scientist. I discuss real things and have opinions about them. You may think it's stupid, or you may see what I see. Hopefully, we all get a laugh out of it. Strap on your booze goggles, cause this is a quick shot or two with Dr. Chatter. Today's official, unofficial sponsor is Hellboy Hellwater Cinnamon Whiskey. Now you might say, that's not whiskey, that's pink, that's gotta be Kool-Aid. Well, it tastes like Big Red. I know this, I've had a little bit of it. It's really doing a number on my ulcer. But, here's the shot. Whew! Yeah, that's Big Red. Oh. Tried tricking my friends with it. Bring out the bottle, try to hide the label. And they still say, but it's got a red cap. So I gotta switch bottles on them. You know what? That was actually pretty, that was pretty rough. And I'm actually from the Southwest originally, so just can't handle cinnamon. It's like the cinnamon challenge, only a little worse. But Hellboy's fun, so, you know, watch Hellboy or read the comic, even better. I'm going to actually take another shot with another unofficial sponsor. This is Canadian Club Small Batch Classic 12-year aged whiskey. Batch number C12014, apparently. But this is going to be an interesting Dr. Chatter. Skull. Oh, maybe smooth, but it's still whiskey. Alright, now, I've been on the internet for the past while, of course. And lately I've been noticing a bunch of stuff come up, not only in the news, but seeing it pop up in various accounts that I have. Well, people on the internet seem to be commenting a lot of stuff about this Confederate statue bullshit. So I figure I'd address some of their comments and questions in a video. These have appeared across multiple versions of my account and in multiple different locations, not just online. This actually happened in multiple locations around my town and with people I've talked to. So I'm not just whistling Dixie here. Pardon the pun. But yeah, I mean, Confederate statues lately have all been coming down. So let's address some of these things. First off, saving our history. Well, this is an interesting one because, well, typically memorials and monuments are used to keep the memory of something, whether it be a person, a place, an event, and they usually are there to keep this thing in solemn reverence. You know, kind of good feelings and good wishes and everything. They're not really there to say, oh, look at how we actually did a bad thing. So, on that note, yes. I mean, they're not there to say, hey, we did a bad thing. But that might be part of the problem. Now, I know this has been said before, but history can not only be in books, but it can be in a museum. We're not here to burn books, and we're not here to just throw everything into a museum. I mean, I'll get to more on that later, but think about it. Museums are still public places. And, well, they're the experts in knowing every detail about history in the most objective way possible, still leaving much of it interpretation to the viewer, the person that's experienced whatever they're looking at or coming into contact with. But they're like the gatekeepers. You know, like, if you want to know a fact about George Washington, you go to mountvernon.org, because that is kind of the executor of his estate in a way, and they know everything about Washington and Mount Vernon as it relates to history. So you kind of want to go there and find out what they have to say about certain things. Museums are also really great places to stop thieves and vandals from destroying these things. I mean, I don't want to see statues and memorials and things that are made artistically destroyed and toppled. Even if I didn't like Saddam Hussein, we could still take his statue down and say this is a statue that he made in honor of himself, or, you know, whatever history they want to really write for their state. But these things have to be put in the proper context, and the museum is the best place. A public park where there's no one there that knows anything about the history of what this man did, standing there willing to answer questions, that's not the best place. Seriously, if you want to save history, you put it in a museum. Do you remember World War II? Do you remember what, like, England did with their museums? They saved everything. They put it all down into underground tunnels. Museums are the best place for these things, especially if they cause controversy. I mean, they're museums. Do I have to remind you of the Salon de Refusés? Controversy. Guernica. Museums are great places for controversy. Support your local museums. Do we need to keep the statues of enemies of our state in a public area where they're not kept in the correct context? No, we don't need them there. Do we need to tear them down? No. We need to take them down peacefully, respectfully, and put them in a place where they can actually be viewed in that light. Specifically, like a museum. Southerners, you want to keep these things safe? Hey, might as well invest in a few museums, right? It'll help the community. Just saying, it'll provide jobs. Stop thieves, stop vandals. It's a good idea. Like I said, we're not burning books, and we're not ISIS toppling statues, especially not statues in museums or relic sites like Palmyra. No. Let's save the history, but let's put it in a better place than out in public, where any old fool can decide to get a bunch of other known fools to topple something that you hold in reverence, while they decide, oh hey, you know, maybe that guy was actually a slave owner and a slave beater, like Robert E. Lee. So you might say, oh, but it's just a Confederate statue. There are statues for the Union too. Yeah, let's look at that number. At last count, from what I remember, there were, at the start of this argument between people, 1,503 Confederate statues, monuments, and memorials. And, oh, how many did the Union have? Let's see, it was 138. The Confederacy has like 10 times as many monuments, statues, and memorials than the Union. Now, most of these were put up by white supremacists like the KKK and other Southern supporters. And these were mostly during racially charged times, such as during the Jim Crow era and during the Civil Rights Movement. Remember, this Civil Rights Movement was also a time when there was a thing called the Mississippi Sovereignty Commission, which was implicated in the ordering of murder of 3 people and then hiding that information throughout various governmental archives across the South. This implicates a lot of people, and we found this documentation and we recollected it, and we even charged one of the people who was a member of the Mississippi Sovereignty Commission. we have groups like this that are putting up these statues and doing horrible things. Well, I don't think we should have so many of these statues. It seems a bit ridiculous when they have 10 times as many statues commemorating the South's action in the war, when they were the bad guys and they lost. I mean, that might be a little too culturally relative for you, but to me that seems like a clear-cut case of they were fucking wrong. Who cares if they won or lost? They were fucking wrong. But maybe you don't remember the history of the Mississippi Sovereignty Commission. Or remember that slavery was like the big thing of why the Confederacy started seceding, why they ended up getting blockaded eventually, and why they went to war with the North and tried to establish themselves as a nation. I mean, you're getting pretty one-sided. And let's go more into all this, shall we? Because there were more comments. I'll bring them up. This is an interesting subject. I'm getting pretty excited at revealing this information for people that obviously didn't take the time or patience to research. Now, the Confederate soldiers. Supposedly, most of the white people that were soldiers, they were poor, because there was roughly 25% rich white, 75% poor white, and everything else that was a person in that state, which they didn't really grant status to, happened to be black or colored, as they would say, and not really have full rights. Not exactly. Not equally. Well, yes. The South had a smaller population of whites than the North did. I've covered this before. But they also had a crap ton of black people. Mostly slaves. So, to say that they were down manpower, that's kind of arbitrary. They did have all the military academies, many of the best generals, and even soldiers and everything by training. They had pretty much the best. They had a large complement of supplies, but they did not have the resources to make more supplies. They did not have the factories to make more supplies. Those were all in the North. And after the blockade, yeah, they couldn't get it from overseas. So they were basically put into an awkward position because they put themselves into this awkward position. And of course, I'll have to explain the awkward position they put themselves in a little later. But this is all going to tie in, trust me. I know, many Confederate soldiers, they were drafted. As were they in the Union. I mean, when the Irish got here, usually they'd hop off the boat, and if they were a guy, they'd have a guy right there saying, hey, do you want to fight for freedom and join the Union Army? Great benefits, great pay, see the world. I mean, kind of a shitty way to recruit soldiers into people that just want to come into the country and be an American. But, like I said, the South was drafted too. And they could have chosen to dodge the draft. They could have chosen to try and change their political community so that they could actually have more of a voice and say, no, a draft is bad, we oppose a draft. They could have also revolted and retaliated, but they didn't. And they chose to follow the politics and go along with the politics. And some of these people, yes, they wanted to be the rich white elite. They wanted to have the plantation and the slaves and the easy life of comfort and tons of money. Not all of them, but some of them. And they all could have chosen not to fight against their original nation's army. chose the opposite. They chose to put their politics aside and just fight. They chose to fight for the side that said, let's keep slaves slaves. That's a horrible position. Why should we commemorate them? They didn't have honor. Now, you say, well, they could have given guns to the black people. Oh yeah, they could have. And at the end, towards the end of the war, they were seriously considering giving guns to slaves. But remember what they also said. Giving slaves guns would contravene the principles upon which we fight. Meaning they fought to have slaves, not make slaves free. And they also said that not to give slaves guns would also mean the loss of all we hold most sacred, slaves and all other personal property, lands, homesteads, liberty, justice, safety, pride, and manhood. Well, but, Southern whites, they were told they were better because they were white. Because these rich people didn't want the blacks and the whites to get along and be the mostly majority and get them out of power. Why would they? They wanted to keep their power. That's capitalism. The big trees want to take everything for themselves and not give anything to the small trees. It becomes a very dishonest system after a while. And I'm not trying to preach socialism. I'm just preaching that's the way it is. You'll get big trees like that. And sometimes those big trees get felled really unexpectedly. And then all those little trees do have a chance to grow. But do all the little trees need to be big trees? I'm not arguing that either. These same Southerners heard their politicians say things like, in my opinion, the worst calamity that could befall us would be to gain our independence by the valor of our slaves instead of our own. They're saying that even if they won the war, if they won it by giving slaves guns and freeing some of them, or at least giving them the chance to fight for freedom, which doesn't really free them if they're fighting for a country that wants slavery, then it's not a good thing, or not as good than if a white person did it. Black people just don't know how to win like white people. White people are way better at winning. I mean, come on, look, they shake hands in a line. Black people just do a little dance because they won. I mean, what's that about? Yeah, most people actually do a little dance. The shaking hands is like no hard feelings. We're trying to respect you and not do the little dance, but we might do the little dance. We won. Now I know in my last video I had that one Confederate statue from the Confederate Sons of America, and it said, sacrificing all for honor. Interesting. Correction. That was, those who sacrificed all save honor. And this leads us into the argument of sacrificing all for honor. Well, sure, if you can say that sacrificing the poor to save the opinions and lineage of a few rich white people as honorable, then I guess yes. And, oh yeah, if you also think it's honorable that people are treated like cattle and not given any rights and severely dealt with. Doesn't seem too honorable to me. But let's see. Now, people are saying, oh, it was about slavery. Oh, well, it's just slavery. Well, no. You see, slavery actually also connotates a lot of things. Like, child slavery, child labor, sex slavery, child sex slavery, molestation, rape, human trafficking, kidnapping, bounty hunting, assault and battery, and torture! That's a little MST3K joke if you care to look that one up. Oh, and let's not forget that they also made escaping illegal, and they made helping escape slaves illegal because, you know, they were supposedly moral. They wanted people as property. And many of the black uprisings that happened were used to legitimize the oppression of the black man in America. They saw fit to take away education. They did not give them access or knowledge of their culture and tried to strip them of that knowledge and that culture. They were not free to use their native language. They were supposed to use English and learn English. Their access to, knowledge of, and free right to express and practice their original religion was also prohibited. They had no freedom of religion. In fact, many slave owners said, no, you got to convert to Christianity. No, you got to do this. And that's one of the interesting things about voodoo is when voodoo came into existence, they had to actually hide the fact that they were worshiping their gods and use the pictures of saints. But they still referred to them as their gods. Because they didn't care about the image. They thought the image was superfluous to the intent. You know, they even started taking away their names and said you can't use your original name if you had one. You're going to get a Western or Christian style sounding name like Tobias, William, Frederick, Joshua, Thomas, even Michael. And the list goes on. Now, does that seem like an honorable thing to fight for? No. And they time and time again said this is what we're fighting for. This is why we seceded. This is what we're fighting for. I don't think that's honorable. Even if you had a relative fighting for that, I don't think that's honorable. I'm supposedly related to people from the OK Corral. Thomas McGlary, in fact. But you don't see me saying he was honorable. He was a fucking outlaw. You can't just say, oh, well, it was a different time. You know, people acted differently. You would have acted differently. How do you fucking know that? How do you fucking know that? Because there were people from that time period that did judge them and did disagree with them. So how can you say I can't fucking judge them? It's the wrong fucking attitude, and if you agree with that, it's the wrong fucking attitude. And arguing for them, it seems like a silly hypocrisy. Well, you may disagree, but I'm just saying, that's what it seems like. Yeah, they even tried using the moral tariff. That's M-O-R-R-I-L-L, moral. The moral tariff. To say that was a bad thing. That's one of the things that kick-started the Civil War. Okay, well let's see. The moral tariff was a import tax. Now, I don't know if you can see a map, but if you have a map, take it out and look at how many states were in the South and had much more coastline than the North. So how many ports do you think were down there? Then remember that many of the trade winds and trade routes went to the Caribbean. And thus, the South, being very adjacent to the Caribbean, also partook in those trade routes and that trade. There was a lot more naval trade in the South. No shit. Now, they say, oh, we were peacefully protesting and lobbying. No. You guys seceded. Your people quit their jobs as representatives of your states and left, helping to pass the moral tariff after you had seceded. And you're going to say it's unjust? You can't secede. You can quit your post, but you can't secede. That's not actually in the amendments. The amendments that most people say, I think it was like, was it the 9th and the 10th? The ones about states' rights? But peacefully protesting is not quitting your post and resigning and forming a new union and taking half of the land away from that union and saying we'll fight to the death to hold on to it. That's kind of fucked up, dude. That's not cool. It's not how you do things. Now, they'll say, oh, but it was 30% of the population of the US that was paying 80% of the taxes. No shit. Like I said, it was an import tax, so 30% of the white population living in the South was paying the tax. And it wasn't even 30% of those people. In America, that 30%, most of the people that owned the docks were rich white people. I mean, yes, there were some other merchants and everything, but one thing it really hurt was it hurt the plantations in the Caribbean. They ran plantations for sugar, really abusive plantations. Not only that, but it also stopped major trading ports for slaves. Which, yes, as a slaver, you're against that. But that's because you're a slaver. Now, if they impose a carrot tax, are you going to get pissed off because people that don't eat carrots are not paying the tax? And you're forced to shoulder the burden? You're a carrot eater. A carrot eater. You eat carrots. Therefore, when you buy carrots, you pay a tax on them. Because there's a carrot tax. If the non-carrot eater bought a carrot, they'd pay the carrot tax. It's not targeting you, it's targeting the product. It is not the same thing as the British taxes because we had no representation. Your guys' representation quit and decided to start their own country, stealing half our land and resources and then fighting us over it. And you know, the British taxes didn't target the Britons. They kept lobbying more taxes against us. That's why we went to war. We didn't have representation. We were getting more of the taxes. The other guys on back of the mainland, or whatever you want to call it, back on the island, back in the kingdom, they weren't paying those taxes. That's why we were mad. It's not the same thing to say that they left because of the moral tariff or unfair, unjust taxes. No, they're smoke screening this. They're completely shedding light on a little tiny snippet without telling you the much bigger picture. I mean, this tariff really only affected 25% of the white population there. The richest ones, the ones that own the slaves, the ones that own the docks, the ones that were really running the big, expensive stores and other places of business. It affected them. It didn't affect the poor guy living out in the sticks, farming on his little homestead. Now, let's remember another fact. Ironically, the moral tariff was adopted on March 2nd, 1861, during the administration of President James Buchanan, a Democrat. It was the 12th of 17 planks in the platform of the incoming Republican Party, which had not yet been inaugurated, and it appealed to industrialists and factory workers as a way to foster rapid industrial growth. Which, yes, happened to be in the North, but the South could have tried to industrialize too. They had the money, they just needed the resources. But the South had already seceded, and were drawing up plans to essentially steal the land and the resources and fight for oppressing people and treating them like cattle. So you have fun saying that those Confederate statues were a bunch of honorable people, because no, they weren't. They weren't. They fought for a cause. They were like, I'm gonna be in a war, may as well not let politics go into it. Dude, wars are about politics. You fought on the wrong side. I'm kind of sorry if you think that it's bad that the rich and the wealthy were going to get taxed unfairly for doing really horrible things to humans and trying to hold on to power and get more money and get their way. And if they weren't going to do it, then by gum, they'd raise up arms and fight for it. It sounds kind of like all those people in the Antifa movement and BAM. Like, seriously, you want to commit violence until people see the light to your cause? That's fucked up. I don't agree with that from any side. I even had a guy say, oh, the blockade was an act of war. An act of war. They declared war right away. It was war. Well, no, blockades are kind of like sanctions. We're trying to curtail the unruly, the ones who are not willing to listen to reason, a well-reasoned, better argument. And might I add, the Battle of Fort Sumter was the first shot of the war, and the South started firing first. War was not declared on the South. It was not unofficially sent through channels that war versus the South was going to start, and did start at the beginning of the blockade. No. Let's see what happened. Oh yeah. It was done after the Battle of Fort Sumter. That's what happened. The Battle of Fort Sumter took place April 12th to the 13th in 1861. The blockade was proclaimed by Lincoln on April 19th, 1961. So, I say this with all due respect. Learn fucking history. That's a PSA from me to you, Dr. Chatter. And so a guy says to me, but no one was killed at the Battle of Fort Sumter. Okay, well, if you mean by direct fire, then yes, no one was killed or shot by direct fire from the Confederacy to the Union or the Union to the Confederacy. No one was killed by direct fire. But there was one person that died and 3 people that were wounded. On the Union side, when their artillery cannon malfunctioned and exploded, and they would not have been manning it or firing it if they were not returning fire, because they were defending themselves from the Confederates who fired the first volleys. So the Confederates were indirectly involved in killing 1 person and wounding 3. Yeah, they didn't kill him directly, but they're kind of the reason these guys had to do what they did and died because of it. Probably not as bad as that girl that was text messaging her boyfriend and telling him to commit suicide, but it doesn't paint you guys in a favorable light. In fact, studies show that a lot of people tend to actually shoot above the heads of people because they don't want to be the killer. And soldiers that have been through a lot of shit will start aiming more true and fighting to survive. The fresh recruits at the start, no. They'll aim high, they'll aim wide. Sad state of affairs, but that's what happens. The South fired first. The blockade came after. Just get your facts right. Come on, people. I knew it was coming, so I kind of mixed a little half and half. Canadian Club, Hellboy, Hellwater. He say, oh, that's 3 shots. Oh man, you're succumbing to alcoholism. Here's the cinnamon. No, actually, hold on. Not a fan of cinnamon. Okay. Some people will say, oh, well, you know, General Lee was anti-slavery. He was totally against slavery. Well, that's not actually true. They'll point to his father dying and leaving him slaves that he was supposed to hold as slaves for 5 years according to the will. This is the story that is legitimized. And then at the end of the 5 years, he was to let all the slaves go free. Well, if he was anti-slavery, he would have just gotten rid of the slaves. Look at me. I'm anti-slavery. I own no fucking slaves. You see how fucking easy that is? It's not hard to speak out against slaves. Can you hear how I'm fucking doing it? I want to put this forward to you because you may think, oh, maybe he's being harsh. Maybe he did speak of it. Possibly in private letters, possibly in a journal. But he was not a big proponent of speaking his mind to large assemblies of people, really influencing politics. And if he was anti-slavery, this was a hot button issue, and I think he probably should have. Because slavery does dehumanize people, and it puts a lot of crimes. Crimes we're still fighting today. If you don't believe me, look up the sex slave industry. These are bad things, people. But let's remember some things about General Lee. He still kept his slaves, I believe, on the plantation for at least 3 years. 3 years. That's over 900 days. Technically over 1,000. But what did he do during those 3 years? He enacted harsh punishments. He recaptured escaped slaves and beat them with the help of the city magistrate. And he allowed his troops that he commanded to actually run amok among slave communities. Among free slaves, free men, escaped slaves, doesn't matter what number they were in or how many there were, he let his men run rampant. I'm not sure if he bought slaves or if he sold slaves, but I know he also sent these slaves out to other plantations and worked them off on other plantations. If he was anti-slavery, don't you think he would have just gotten rid of his slaves? I mean, trying to say, oh, I'm hiding behind this will that I have to do exactly to the letter. Fuck that. Why do you have to do exactly to the letter? You own the slaves now. Fuck your dad. Just free him. And then you chose to fight for the side that you had your plantation on. And then what happened to your plantation? Oh, I believe it was called Arlington House. And it was an Arlington plantation or something like that. And the Union took it over and started burying their dead there. And that's why we have Arlington Cemetery. American values were changing. Yes, the paradigm changed. Yes, people were judged back then. And I think today we can still judge them that way. Oh, and one more thing. I know what you may be saying. That George Washington and Robert E. Lee both had slaves, beat slaves, possibly tortured slaves, hunted down escaped slaves, and were American generals. But, Washington fought for this country. He didn't fight against this country. And as far as we know, he didn't allow his troops to terrorize citizens of this country. You may argue that slaves aren't citizens or weren't back then, but that's kind of a shitty thing to say. Just calling another human property and not a citizen when they actually live in this country. That's kind of shitty. Just take away all their humanity and civil rights. We know where you stand when you say that. It really sounds like Robert E. Lee was kind of a terrorist leader. And he even himself said he felt sick and did not want to surrender. He said he'd rather die than surrender. But he did because he knew he couldn't win. It's a losing argument to be on the Confederate side. You know, George Washington, as far as I know, did not ransack America. But I might be wrong on that one. Pretty sure he wasn't considered a terrorist by the Americans, maybe by the loyalists who still thought of themselves as being British and didn't realize that the British were being unfair. But maybe we should think harder about who we put up on pedestals. One parting question for all of you at home. Why do Christians in this country love their graven images so much and idolization of other notable humans? Well, I guess it's true what they say. You never really want to meet your heroes because you just might be disappointed. Alright, leave your questions and comments. Anyone want to answer the question? Put it down below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and hit that bell so you're notified when a new episode comes up. I'm a little sporadic, it's still getting back into the flow. I've got a lot more work at my other job, but I'm going to keep at it, so don't forget to subscribe. And until then, please, please, please remember that knowledge changes the world. Good night.